There's no way we're going to get to all of the questions, but thank you for sending them in. These are the questions from the audience. Dr. Elliott, let's start with this one. Why are we canceling everything for this virus, but we didn't for SARS or H1N1?
So, with SARS and H1N1, they were not as severe as this virus. It didn't impact as many people, and the death rate was not as high. So we were closely monitoring those diseases just as closely as we were monitoring coronavirus, and now the red flags are up. This is a much more aggressive disease.
But SARS, didn't we have, I think, 10,000 dead here in America and 1,000 before we even reacted to it? What's different?
This is different in the sense that we're seeing the infection rate and mortality rate upwards of 10 times higher than what we saw with SARS. So I'm not saying that we weren't slow to react to SARS and we should have reacted sooner. But with this virus, it's even worse.
All right. Is it possible people in January and February had flu symptoms and had negative flu strep tests, but really had COVID-19? Is it possible the high number of deaths correlated to seasonal flu was actually COVID-19, but never identified as such?
There's no way to have a crystal ball to be able to tell for sure because we didn't know that coronavirus was a thing then, and we weren't quite sure how it was presenting. But I could say that the symptoms of the flu are very different from what you're seeing with coronavirus. So with the flu, you're getting more upper respiratory type issues and sore throats. And with coronavirus, it's much more of a lower respiratory problem that leads to pneumonia. So the presenting symptom is more of a cough and fever and shortness of breath. So they do present differently.
Okay. This listener wants to know, how do I self-treat COVID-19?
So that's a great question. There is some conflicting literature that recently has come out as it relates to anti-inflammatory medications and aspirin. And so right now the guidance is we're not quite sure, but if you have a fever and you're not feeling well, you should opt to take Tylenol as opposed to some of the anti-inflammatory medications like ibuprofen and aspirin. But again, too soon to tell. My recommendation, err on the side of Tylenol. It's better for fevers anyway. Stay hydrated, get lots of rest, and make sure that you are isolated from anybody else in your home.
Okay. Will warming spring temperatures cause the virus to slow down? Is this a seasonal flu?
So right now, COVID-19, the coronavirus, is not behaving the way that the seasonal flu is. If you look at the pockets of distribution, it is infecting people in warm places. It's popping up in South America right now. We're in there in the dead of summer. It's in Iran. So, we can't really tell. I think it's too soon to tell whether or not this is a seasonal thing.
Do you know when we'll be able to tell that?
It's tough to say. I think we learn more and more every day. I think in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have a pretty good answer in terms of how this virus is behaving.
What is the range recovery of outcomes? I've heard everything from complete recovery to some left with 30% diminished lung capacity afterwards. What are the facts?
So if you're generally healthy, you don't have any underlying medical conditions, and you're under the age of 60, most people recover. We're seeing a very high recovery rate. We're not seeing that being the case if you're over the age of 65 and you have chronic medical conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes. There, we're seeing the mortality rate upwards of 10+%. So that's where we really have to be concerned about the elderly population and getting them infected. It's really tough to tell on an individual basis what happens to lung function. But if you end up on a ventilator, then there's a chance that even if you do fully recover, you're going to have a diminished lung capacity, at least for a period of time.
I saw something, I think it was out of Belgium today, where they said they were taking chest x-rays or CT scans of people in their 20s that fully recovered, really didn't feel like they were that impacted, and they had scarring on their lungs. Have you heard that?
Yeah, there's some concern there, but at the same time, it's hard to interpret that data, right? Because we didn't have a baseline on these people, and so they may have been seemingly perfectly healthy, but they could have had undiagnosed lung disease. We don't know for sure. So without kind of a case control where you have a baseline of before and after, it's kind of tough to interpret those results.
Next question. Do those contracting coronavirus develop immunity so they won't be reinfected by the same strain?
That's typically the way the immune system works, right? When you're exposed to something, your immune system then develops memory to it. So then the next time that you're infected, your body already mounts and has a response to it. It says, hey, I remember that. And then it goes and it attacks it right away. That's typically how the immune system works. So unless this virus is really wonky and has some other forms of, sometimes viruses can have something called a neutralizing antibody that kind of blocks what our immune system is doing. Again, too tough to, too soon to tell, but I would say that most likely if you've been infected once, you're not going to get infected again.
But we don't know that for sure?
We don't know that for sure, but that's most likely the way that
Right.
the virus is going to behave.
Okay. Is COVID-19 transmitted via food like restaurants or pickups or groceries or anything like that?
Well, we know that COVID can live on surfaces. So food is technically a surface, and it can live, typically last a couple of hours, but it can last up to a couple of days. I think the latest case report is up to 3 days on surfaces. So what does that mean? It's the food, it's the packaging, it's all that stuff. Now, the good news around food is once you heat it, it kills off the virus. So if you are doing takeout food, my recommendation would be put it in the microwave, put it in the oven, recook it, reheat it, have burnt steak, and at least you're killing off the virus.
All right, so take it even if it's hot and just reheat it or recook
Yes.
it. What temperature does it have to go up to?
At least above 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So my recommendation is you put it in the oven, you put it on the stove top, and you want to make sure that you recook it is a better term than just reheating.
Okay, good. Is there any truth to the video going around claiming that heat therapy, breathing in hot air into your sinuses, kills COVID and other respiratory viruses?
Please don't do that, because what you're doing is you're potentially introducing new bacteria into your nasal passages. When we're talking about heating something, we're talking about temperatures over 230 degrees Fahrenheit. We're not talking about something that's, a nice humidified treatment or saunas or steam rooms. I mean, viruses in general love mucus and they love humidity. So you could potentially be introducing new viruses and bacteria into your body. Please don't do that.
Okay. Can the virus be spread via money, or is that a rumor? I think so.
Technically, yes. I mean, it is, it is a surface that, so if somebody with coronavirus is actively handling money and then hands you that money and the virus within an hour or so, or that virus is still living, technically the answer to that question is yes. In stores, you're seeing all the cashiers wearing gloves. But you should exercise precaution. Pay with your credit card and carry hand sanitizer around and wipe it down.
The next question is, what is the condition of a coronavirus survivor's lungs? Let's say I'm 56 or 60. I smoked, but 20 years ago, 30 years, it has to be almost 40 years ago now. So it wasn't really I've got good lungs. What's going to happen to my lungs if I get it? I'm 50, 60 years old. After I heal.
Right. It's tough to say, but the likelihood is that your lungs will recover. Yes, there may be some residual scarring, but you really only need about 70% of your lungs in order to, breathe normally and go about your everyday activities and not be symptomatic. I think the bigger issue is, the recovery time might be longer, might be a little harder, but generally speaking, your lungs should recover. And for you smokers out there, stop smoking now. The second you stop smoking, within 3 months, your lungs recover over 30% of their lung capacity.
Do you worry about a second wave of COVID-19, let's say this fall? I've read that the flu of 1918 mutated and killed more people during the second wave than the first. Is that true, and it should be something we are concerned about here?
With the flu, it's a little bit different where we have multiple strains. There are multiple strains of the flu virus that actually go into the vaccine. Here, coronavirus itself has already gone through the mutation. That's how it was with SARS-CoV-2. So it's kind of already gotten that initial mutation. My hope is that when a vaccine is developed, it's not just the SARS-CoV-2, but to a couple of other, highly mutable strains as well. It's typically what happens with a vaccine. It's usually not to just one single thing. Scientists are smart enough to say, hey, let me put a couple of other strains in there so that we're protected.
Dr. Elliott, thank you so much for taking the questions and being with us, and especially on such short notice. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right. We'll be back in just a minute. I do want to point out that our original guest will probably be joining us perhaps on Friday's show, perhaps on radio this week. That is all dependent on her schedule. But I think we have a lot of great answers there. We'll try to put those all up on glennbeck.com as well, so you can share those answers with your friends. Back in a minute.